Hi everyone, and welcome to session number 5 of our Ask Me Anything series with ECS. Thanks to every one of you for taking time out of your busy Friday schedules to join us this afternoon and out of your lunchtime as well. So today our session is going to be on containers, and I'm joined by Michael and Morgan, who are here to provide answers to any of the questions that you have on anything related to container technology. So if you have any questions for our panel today, then please leave your questions in the live chat below this video on YouTube, and we'll do our best to get through all of your questions. If your question isn't answered, then we'll be leaving a comment on the recording after the stream ends. So we'll be taking a note of all your questions. So if it's not answered during the stream, we'll do our best to answer it on the comments as the recording is available. So I'm now going to hand over to Michael and Morgan to introduce themselves. So we'll start with Michael. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Michael, as Ali said, and I've been a consultant here at ECS Digital for about 5-ish years. Spent a lot of that time working with containers, a lot of that time working in sort of slightly more ordinary CI/CD, and nowadays spend most of my time whacking things into Kubernetes and helping people out with their misconceptions and problems there.
Cool, that's excellent. How about you, Morgan?
Yeah, very similar. So I'm Morgan Atkins. I, along with Michael, head up the internal container practice inside ECS Digital. So we look after onboarding of staff as well as helping customers with their container migration. Specifically myself, I work a lot with the Docker Enterprise stack and Kubernetes. And I'm taking a bit of a left turn now into container security and deploying large-scale containers and service platforms with my customers. So.
That's cool. That's great. Thank you. So we're now going to dive into some of the questions that we've got. And as a reminder, please put your questions into the live chat box below this video. And we'll be keeping an eye out for any questions that come in as we go through them. And also check out our Twitter feed at ECS_IT, where we'll be live tweeting some thoughts that Michael and Morgan share with us, and we'll be live tweeting throughout the event. So if you can't make all the YouTube stream, you can check the Twitter feed after this. So that's ECS_IT. So we'll dive into our first question. And the first question that we've got is, what would you say the main advantages of using containers are? And we'll start with you, Morgan, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, I was just trying to take out the smooth jazz that's in the background. So yeah, to the advantages of using containers. So there are a lot. This is kind of a really broad question in terms of how you answer this question. So I guess we can look at what are containers and what they can give you first of all. So the idea of isolated processes, being able to have discrete applications that have all of their dependencies and their requirements and run them in a single runtime, and they only then can access resources that are allocated to them. Broadly speaking, containers are generally more secure because of this, because you haven't got the added benefit or the added risk of having additional resources inside your container runtime for potential attack vectors. So you can take out anything that isn't specifically required for an application to run, and this stops potential attackers or miscreants being able to use resources within a system to try and infiltrate a particular application. Then kind of what I generally use containers for and where I see the benefits are mostly around kind of local development. So increasing that kind of that feedback loop and the ability to deploy a like-for-like kind of production stack without impacting other people that are around you within a given shared environment. And then taking that kind of a step further is, once you've got the ability to run kind of a local like-for-like stack from production, you can use the same sort of deployment mechanisms. So instead of having the traditional developer experience where you would be writing some code in an IDE, you run it and it doesn't necessarily work on someone else's machine. So you have the adage that is, it works on someone else. It works on my machine. Why doesn't it work on yours? Maybe your environment's different. Maybe you've got some, you've done some dev magic or DevOps magic to make it work to run a few tests. Where containers kind of alleviate that is that it gives you a single unified approach to running and deploying applications, and being able to ship all of the dependencies for that application to whoever needs to run it, whether that's another developer, someone in operations, another machine, or eventually through your deployment environments, staging, and eventually into production.
That's great. So quite a lot around the security and the isolation and the repeatability of deployments, essentially, there, and environment setting up.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Michael?
I did lose connection there a little bit, so hopefully I won't repeat you. But for me, some of the top benefits of containers are probably portability and flexibility. It's a really, really useful tool to be able to say, first of all, wherever I build this, it should work, provided I'm running roughly the same architecture and operating system. And at the same time, to be able to build or bake into a container image, something that you can take around with you to any kind of technology. Sorry, I said that backwards. You can take any kind of technology around with you to those places. So to give you one example, not to overflow into any other questions, hopefully not. Working on a project where we were solving most of our problems using Python, because we had mostly Python developers, and occasionally a problem came up that was easier to solve with the help of some of our front-end devs to do some Node.js work and some JavaScript work. Being able to mix and match like that is, it can be an advantage and a disadvantage, but I think it's an overwhelming, there's an overwhelming case for it being an advantage in most situations.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to give people the option of using a technology that they're comfortable using, and to be able to do that in an environment where it doesn't create an overhead for operations to be able to run all those different permutations of an implementation. Yeah,
they all sound great.
Adding to that, really is the kind of, to read the crib sheet of kind of containers. It's the idea of like horizontal scaling. So traditional application deployments. If you go way back before VMs were really a household thing, you'd deploy physical infrastructure. You'd have to deploy an operating system, deploy all of its dependencies, and then you have an application. And in order then to scale that application, you would have to replicate the entire stack, the application, its dependencies, the operating system, and roll in new hardware into your data center. What containers above kind of the virtualization, the move to virtualization gives you is the ability to scale an individual service, an individual application, and not have to replicate all of the underlying hardware, operating system, and dependencies, because containers can share them across a given host. So I guess that's really one of the main benefits and one of the main calling cards for the use of containers, certainly in these shifts to the cloud and to optimization of hardware and the move from in-house data centers to public and private cloud.
Yeah, that's great. They're both very comprehensive answers, a lot to sort of dissect there. That's great. Thank you both. So we've had a couple of specific questions come through. One was, do you know if it's possible to run Linux containers in a Windows EC2? And I think what we'll do with that question is we'll get back to you. So we'll have a wee look into it and leave, as I mentioned before, leave a comment in on the recording of the video after the session is ended. But I think there was also a question, would you advise using containers for databases, or would it be better to use a platform as a service for database management, such as RDS and AWS, and why? And Michael, I'll hand that one over to you.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to talk about that. So I think famously, there have been some strong opinions on running databases and containers. The basic takeaway is don't do this in production. It's it's not generally a good idea to run anything that's kind of transactional in a container because of the way we manage them. They could disappear at any time. They could be switched off and moved to a different host. It's just all sorts of scenarios in which you really, really don't want a process to be suddenly cut off. And where your web application can probably tolerate that, a database is more than likely it won't. Obviously, there are special cases and exceptions, and it's possible technically to do this, but generally speaking, it's not the best idea. On the other hand, something that we do very, very often is run database containers in those lower level environments where you just need a database. It doesn't matter if it's not as fast as production. You're not worried about the data integrity of it. You're not worried about backups and continuously maintaining something for a long time. And they are super useful. Even Microsoft now offers a Linux-based version of SQL Server that runs in a container, which I think is what a world we live in. And that has been instrumental in smoothing out some problems in lower environments like automated testing. You can just spin up a bunch of containers, including your application and the database. In my current case would be in Kubernetes, and then once you're done with it, blow the whole thing away as if it never existed. And it's just been really, really useful. I can't imagine going back to a world in which we'd need to have standing SQL databases just ready for a test environment to use where we're limited that way. It would really, really hamper us. Although we have worked there, it's just we don't have to now.
Yeah, I guess to kind of echo that, it's and Michael did kind of touch on it. Is databases and containers is entirely possible, but just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. Some depending on who you are and your background and your experience, I'm sure database admins will say you've got people who have a lot of experience with containers and understand the kind of the life cycle of a container and how to manage them in production, and say, well, it's fine, we can do it as long as we maintain that integrity. But there are much better tools for managing databases in the cloud and at scale than I'm sure most people could do on a container as a service platform. So why not leverage them?
Yeah, that makes sense. Apologies for any background noise that you can hear. I think we can just about still make Morgan make yourself out with the answers you're given. Obviously, given the work from home situation, it's quite a common thing these days with background noise and other interruptions. So I want to move on to another question around how has the use of containers changed the industry over the past few years? And I think we'll start with Michael on this one.
I'm afraid I didn't catch that because my network connection went down.
It's all kicking off now. So how has the use of containers changed the industry over the past few years, would you say? And those like Michael's frozen. Morgan, do you want to take this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, all I can see is Michael with his closed eyes. Apologies again for the internet. So how has containers changed the industry? I guess it's really the shift towards the adoption of cloud in both of its facets, whether it's public or private, and everything we've spoken about so far in terms of isolation, using it in low environments, streamlining the adoption of kind of faster feedback loops, and certainly kind of the shift to DevOps and agile ways of working. I know that we covered on the last AMA agile methodologies and how changing the culture really is more than just changing the technology, it's changing how people work. And I think that containers have just allowed people to be a bit more independent in how they build and maintain applications, giving people and certainly developers and the operations team the ability to do what they do best, as opposed to governing what they are allowed to do and where they're allowed to do it. So certainly that whole shift to autonomy, I think, is what containers has certainly allowed us to do. And containers aren't new; they've been around for a very long time, but just the advancements that have been made with making it a lot easier to consume has improved the day-to-day working life of most developers and operations teams.
Yeah, that's great. Michael, I think you're back with us now.
In and out, it's not the best. Yeah, sure. So again, having had intermittent connection, I hope I don't repeat you, Morgan, or if I do, I guess that's good. In terms of how have containers changed the industry, I'd say we've been talking about things like concepts like pets versus cattle for a really long time. It's like coming up on 10 years now, maybe it's more like 8 years. And containers have really enabled this in a way that wasn't possible before in the same way. Nowadays, we're looking at being able to have servers built based on golden images where they don't really contain any software that we need to manage. Obviously, in the ideal case where you're running some orchestrator across the top of your infrastructure that deploys manages containers for you, you almost don't need to care what's on your hosts at all. We're at the point where nowadays you honestly can manage a massive fleet of servers, really like cattle. They're just cookie cutter machines, and you've got technologies like Spot Inst, and you can leverage Amazon's version of Spot instances to make your costs go down, and to really just, you don't care as long as your cluster is still stable. That in turn has taken an interesting turn. It wasn't long ago that configuration management was all the rage, and companies like Puppet built their empires on, almost on a pets model of servers, right? We had long-lived machines that we were worried about configuration drift on, and we needed to maintain for as long as possible. Even if we were sort of regularly replacing them, we'd want to make sure that they were immune to changes by developers or sysadmins or whatever. And nowadays, in lots of the environments I've deployed recently, that's just gone. We just don't even talk about it. The servers we deal with nowadays live days or hours, not weeks or months. And I don't think that would have been possible the same way without containers. So that's a massive shift for me anyway, in the last few years.
Yeah, I think to kind of echo that, the idea that configuration management was ever a thing is really interesting. And a lot of the conversations I have with people who are looking to adopt containers, they're trying to create systems in which they can still leverage their configuration management systems like Puppet, like Chef, and Ansible in this new world of containers. And we have to explain to them, look, you don't need to. You can define your configuration up front with immutable infrastructure and allow, if you need to make a change, you just blow away the infrastructure. Everything that is stateful remains in storage somewhere. And you just redeploy it with a new change. You can do canary deployments, you can do blue-green deployments to make sure you don't have a degradation of service. But there isn't somebody sat in a darkened room somewhere running Ansible or Puppet playbooks to try and fix a particular issue on a live service. You just blow it away and start again. So I think that's really interesting paradigm shift, I think, for the industry. And I think it has been enabled, containers have certainly enabled that. I wouldn't say that it's necessarily the single focus, but it's certainly a large factor in the shift towards this immutable infrastructure.
Yeah, it definitely seems like as well as the technology becoming available, it's definitely a change in mindset that teams and individuals need to have. So we got asked the question, there might be some people who are new to containers or container technology on this stream just now. So we got asked the question about what are the best resources that you would point people to when they're wanting to learn about containers. And we can maybe you can talk a little bit about how you started working with containers yourself. Start with Michael.
Sure. So how did I come to containers, first of all?
Oh no, we lost you.
Yeah,
a Mac for the first time, and I was still working on a Windows machine and a Mac. We lost me again.
you want to start that answer
Start from the beginning.
Yeah, you're back, so you can start that.
Start from the beginning. Well, so Fourscore and no, sorry. So when I started working with containers, I think I was trying to port. Yes, exactly. Trying to port a Python app between, or trying to do Python development between a Mac and a Windows machine, or just two different machines, I think. And there was something really strange going on. And I needed a way, and this is ironic because I see someone asked about Windows and Linux, and it's going to contradict myself. And I needed a way to basically wrap some of my dependencies up. And I was trying to use virtual environments to do it. Those of you who've worked with Python might have seen these, and it was a huge pain in the ass, basically. And I just did some Googling and found something. So try a container. You can run a Python container, build your dependencies into it, and then Python's platform independent, but it should work. And so that's my sort of ass backwards way into containers that I found. Where did I go from there? I mean, initially it was just kind of that first foray into a new technology. You sort of click around, you build some things, it breaks, it doesn't work, nothing makes sense. But actually, some of Docker's training materials that are just freely available and their documentation were really, really helpful. Nowadays, it's much better than that, though. There's courses on Udemy, there's courses on those other websites that are like Udemy, not that I'm advertising for them. And there are blogs and tutorials all over the internet. I couldn't even recommend a specific one apart from the official Docker documentation. It's just too much. It's all very good.
Have training.
We also have training.
Public and private.
I mean, if you want to talk about that for a second.
Yeah, I can do. I mean, so I guess my response to that is that my go-to is certainly Linux Academy. That's where I generally push a lot of new joiners and anybody that I talk to around first starting out. Kind of Containers 101, if you want to understand the underlying technology and how it works. Obviously, we have subscriptions to Linux Academy internally that everybody gets, so it does help. But the resources that are on there are second to none. And I have coached a number of people through their Docker certifications using that platform. And I guess to answer your further question, Mikey, we as ECS Digital, obviously, we're not just a consultancy, we also provide training to our customers and publicly. We are HashiCorp's #1 training partner in the UK. But we also have a number of Docker certified trainers. Myself and Michael are both certified trainers, and we provide both public and private training, classroom-based, both official and kind of some more of our bespoke training materials. All of it is available on our website if you do want to check them out. Sales pitch over. You can go back to talking about cool stuff now.
So yeah, if you do want to find out more about the training, you can have a look on the ECS website for that. So I think one of the questions that we've had from one of the viewers is, when you're stuck on a deployment, how do you go about debugging that, where do you go for support on that? Is it within your team? Do you go externally? Like, how do you begin to sort of debug issues that you see when you're deploying stuff through containers?
Tough question.
It really depends. I guess that is a cop-out, really. It really does depend on the scale of the issue. If you're using a platform, obviously go to the vendor. You're going to be buying support. If you're running in production, and the vendor will have resources that you can kind of lean on in order to understand specific issues, but I guess general issues. I mean, the internet is there. The combination of the entire human race's knowledge is available on Stack Overflow. And if you can't find it, then that's when you go to the vendor support, I guess.
Are there any, sorry, Michael speaking. Yeah. Sorry, Michael, we lost you a wee bit there.
Digital, we can. Oh, lost me again.
Yeah, do you want to start the answer again?
Am I good now?
Yep.
I'll try again. It's a repeating theme. Got music on one side and unstable connection on the other. So Morgan and Ali and I are really lucky to have a huge body of support behind us in ECS Digital, where we can ask questions if we're really stuck. And that is an incredibly valuable resource that obviously you won't have access to the same way. I guess more often than not nowadays, we find ourselves being the providers of that support. I suppose that's why we're on this call. But where would I go aside from that? Morgan said Stack Exchange is a great idea. I think I tend to find that most problems in containers, first and foremost, you've got to sort out whether it's a problem with, whether it's a mistake you made with Docker or Kubernetes or the container side of things, or a problem that is really with your application or with your the operating system or the kernel you're using. And that's sometimes really difficult to discover. So a really important skill is being able to, or a really important tactic, is pulling together somebody who knows the container really well, who knows your deployment mechanism, your setup of your sorry, I've said deployment mechanism already. So who knows the deployment mechanism and who knows the sort of Docker internals really well, and then put them together with somebody who knows the application really well, or the setup of the environment, whatever is inside the container. And usually between the two of you, one of you will spot, that shouldn't happen. And you'll suddenly it will fall or collapse into one side or the other, and you'll be able to go away and fix it. That's a really big problem. People often end up asking me questions like, how can I do this thing? This port on a Node.js app the other day was one question. And it turned out it was not really a container problem. And if we'd sat down together for 5 minutes, it would have become clear that actually you could have asked that of anybody who knew Node.js and they would have given you the answer. So that's my advice. It's to number one, sort out whether it really is an application problem or whether it's really a container problem, and you should find it easy to go from there.
Yeah, I guess to echo that is that a lot of the debugging that we do and a lot of the skills that I've learned over my time using containers, it's not necessarily how Docker works, it's how Node.js works, how Java works, how Jenkins works, how all of these individual services are pulled together, whether it's a vendor supported Docker image or it's a custom built Docker image, how they're pulled together and then working inside the container. And that's really the most that I've learned around how to run applications. It's debugging, it's understanding, if the error message says file not found, it's probably that the file is missing. And you need to look at the application as opposed to like how the Docker image is being built.
Yeah, I think that's good general debugging advice for any technology as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's certainly to go a step further than that. Really, is being an evangelist for it. Obviously, if you want to learn a technology, really throw yourself into it. Join communities. I'm sure there's Discords, there's Stack Overflow forums, there's meetup groups that you can join. Obviously, we run our own meetup, the DevOps Playground, where you can get hands-on with all the technologies that kind of are in our ECS Digital wheelhouse, and meeting people who will eventually be able to answer those questions when they arise. It's really important to kind of surround yourself with intelligent people who can give you the answer.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I echo that as well. Getting involved in any sort of technology community online is a great way to learn more and to motivate yourself as well. So I think we've had a question through about whether you can create apps within a container within a particular operating system, for example, Linux, and then take that container and run it in Windows. And I'll go to Michael for the answer to that question.
Yeah, this is why I said I might be contradicting myself later. So I started talking about how I'd been porting a Python app around, and you have to remember that Python is, strictly speaking, platform independent, provided you've written your application right. and you build that image on a particular operating system with a particular kernel on a particular processor architecture, then by default, that image is built for that kernel and for that architecture. That means that for most Linux-based operating systems, you can port containers around all you like, and it will just work, provided your process is the same, and most of them are nowadays. But if you want to go from Linux to Windows, you have some problems. Windows containers are a relatively new thing. Containers are a relatively new thing, but even more new. And Microsoft have been working really, really hard on getting a way to run Linux containers on Windows natively. That's really, really important for them, because if you can't run Linux containers on Windows, then you still have a reason to run Linux servers, basically. So I can't say what the current state of it is really, except that it's not something we're using in production. But you will soon be able to run Linux containers fairly natively on Windows. The way around that way we're seeing at the moment is doing very clever things like having a mixed cluster of your container orchestrator of choice, where you can run Windows and Linux applications ideally together. And that cluster just has Windows nodes and Linux nodes, and it knows how to sort them out. So yeah, to answer the question directly, you can't really run containers from one kernel and architecture on a different kernel and architecture without some gymnastics that Windows or Microsoft are trying to provide. Obviously, the big other, let's try in proper English. The popular alternative architecture at the moment for Linux containers is ARM, and probably soon to be Windows as well. And there are flags you can pass to the builders in Linux to build containers for different architectures all at once, which is really cool. If you want to know more about that, then drop us a message and we can talk about that another time, perhaps, because it's quite detailed and in-depth.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for that. That was a really detailed answer. So I'll bring it back to more general questions just now. So we've got one that asks, what advice would you give to a team who are just beginning to use containers in their process or in their workflow? What would you say the first steps are to begin to implement the use of containers?
I can feel that one. And my first answer to this it's difficult, but the blanket answer is document everything and automate as much as possible. And what I mean by that is whether you're adopting containers for your local development, for a shared environment, staging, production, or across the business, it's really important that you understand, first of all, how they work on their own and how you can leverage containers, containerized applications individually, and then how they play as a whole. If you're leveraging them for faster feedback, it's really important that you understand how you increment a change into that container. So what you don't want to do is just add complexity to your application and make it so that it's harder for you to release a change. What you really want to do is document how you build it with a container. Build it in such a way that you don't have to rebuild necessarily every single time you're making the smallest change. And then have that process automated so that even if it's running a script on your local machine or it's pushing it to a Git server and having a centralized build operation, build that and then deploy that for you, having some sort of mechanism so that you can say, right, I've made a change, now I'm going to refresh my infrastructure or refresh my container so that that change will be reflected within the container and eventually within the application. So that gives you a jumping off point.
You got anything you want to add to that, Michael?
Yeah, just make sure I can hear everybody. So for me, I'd say the first piece of advice I'd give somebody if they said we're moving to containers is treat this you compile some. Have we lost me again? You guys are frozen.
No, it's yeah, it catches up. So just you can keep going with your answer.
All right. So if your build process is compiling jars or whatever, and you bake them in some kind of artifact, and then you go forward with that artifact, don't cheat and shoot yourself in the foot by trying to just tack containers onto the end of that process. Rework the entire thing from scratch. Do your build inside containers, so to speak, and then treat that container image as your immutable artifact from then on. You will have a much easier time. All of the technology around containers will suddenly make sense, and you'll be able to leverage more of the advantages. If you just drop your application into a container at the end, it's not the worst thing in the world, but you are throwing away a lot of great stuff that you could be doing that would save you time and effort and headaches and weekend outages and all of those things that people hate.
Yeah, so moving to containers is definitely not a magic switch.
No, it's not. And often companies think it's the golden bullet that's going to fix everything, right? With this, in January of this year, when Windows 7 support went out, lots of companies are scrambling to move to the cloud and move into containers so they can avoid hundreds of millions of pounds a year in security extended support fees. And they thought it was the golden bullet. Right? They thought they could just whack the application in a container, run it in the cloud somewhere, whether it's internal data center or a public cloud, and it's fine. Right? What I think people don't necessarily understand as well about adopting containers is it's really important to understand your migration path and how quickly you want to adopt containers and to what level. So what I mean by that is, do you want to be in production within a year, or in 6 months, or in 10 years? And the best way to kind of to get there is to understand the ancillary services that sit around containers and allow you to deliver them. So pulling images off the Docker Hub and doing it locally and then pushing that to a shared environment is great, but that doesn't scale. So really what you need is some sort of mechanism for storing these images. So as Michael mentioned, having some sort of storage for these artifacts that are Docker images and that would be versioned and distributed to the organization. A mechanism for scanning and ensuring that there aren't any vulnerabilities that have been placed inside the containers or have been discovered in existing applications. And then really a mechanism for distributing them from a central versioned location, whether that's Artifactory, whether that's Nexus, or some other kind of artifact solution. Before you ever go looking at whether it's Kubernetes versus Swarm or Rancher or looking at an AWS versus GCP solution, you really have to understand what services that you require to enable developers to start using the technology. And that does it sounds like a lot of upfront work to be doing, but it's really important for the longevity of a container migration and to how to be able to establish a working pattern that can scale to the likes of to huge retail banks as opposed to just small outfits that are using containers on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, so it's about understanding the technology available to you and the problem you want to solve as well, I suppose, by using containers, or what advantages you want to gain from that.
Yeah, we could wax lyrical about this all day, but one more thing to add on that is lots of people see containers as their path to the cloud, but then they try to do it all at once. And I would say if you can wrangle the time to do this, you will find it a lot more valuable to port your applications to containers first and then move everything to the cloud, because suddenly it's easy to migrate and you've done all the difficult work in an environment that you understand, with tools that you're already used to working with. you can just dump all these containers on some orchestrator on a cattle type infrastructure rather than your on-premise pets. Not everybody can do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think we've got time for one more question. So I want to talk about, or there's a question here about common mistakes or misconceptions that people have when they begin to use containers. I don't know if you want to speak a bit about that first, Michael. Or maybe we'll start with Morgan.
Give him a second if he's going to come back.
Yeah, go ahead, Morgan. Should be fine.
So it really does kind of echo a lot of the last question we had, and going into understanding the depth and the breadth of what is actually required to run a true container platform. You know, people can have these discussions, and they can analyze whether they want to use Kubernetes or they want to use Docker, and that in itself is a pointless argument, because Kubernetes is just running Docker containers, or as we move forward, it's Containerd, and it's kind of more of an open source version. But people get bogged down in decision making that isn't necessarily pertinent to what they're trying to achieve. So as we said in the kind of answered in the previous question, you know, you want to be looking at migrating your application to the cloud. You want to be doing it in a phased approach. Get it into a container so that you understand how it works and how it can be scaled, and the infrastructure that's required to run that container. Whether it's, you know, giving everybody a Linux VDI or a Linux machine that they can run these container images in, or it's running on an updated version of Windows that allows you to run Linux containers as well as Windows containers. And it's changing the infrastructure that's required. And then it's also the additional infrastructure that's required then to distribute and scan and secure all of these container images. So I think the misconception really comes in as they think that they can just adopt containers as if it's like, we're going to go from VMs to containers, and it's basically, you know, it's really easy. We'll just flip a switch, change some config, and it just works. It's sold as certainly as a silver bullet to most problems. We'll just put it in the container. It makes it portable. It makes it secure, and it ticks all the boxes really for kind of procurement and for the bean counters, for lack of a better description, for a shiny new technology that will bring new people to the business, because it's, you know, something that people want to work with, and it will make them make the deployments faster, it will make them more secure, it will make them enter the cloud faster. But I think people will kind of ignore the real work that has to go on before you can ever get to running containers in production. I guess that's the big misconception, is it's going to be easy.
What about yourself,
Michael? We have Mikey back.
Are you there? No, I saw we lost him earlier from the connection completely, so we may have lost him now. So I think that takes us to pretty much bang on the finish time anyway. So I just wanted to first of all thank Morgan and Michael for joining us today and answering the questions. Thank you very much for both of your time, and thanks to everyone who joined the stream as well. Without yourselves watching these streams and asking questions, then we wouldn't have a platform to sort of share our thoughts and expertise. And we hope that you enjoyed the session and enjoyed the bonus jazz music that came from Morgan's side. That was quite nice. Friday lunchtime. Yeah, apologies for any technical issues, but
I need to get myself a backing track for next time.
Yeah. But yes, I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their Friday, and have a good weekend, everyone. Next week we have a session on QA and DevOps on the 24th of July. That'll be. So that involves myself, Alex Watton, and Matt Lowry. So we'll be answering questions that you have on anything to do with QA and DevOps. And as I mentioned, check out our Twitter feed and subscribe to our YouTube channel to get notified of any future events that we may have planned. We want to continue this series into the next month. Yeah, I'll point to the subscribe button if I knew what it was. But yes, have a good day, everyone, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks both. Speak soon.
Thanks, everyone.